It started with a single phone call intercepted outside Melitopol. A Russian logistics officer, drunk and overconfident, bragged to a friend that the next supply train from Crimea would be carrying 1,000 tons of diesel for the front. He didn't know it. But that careless boast would become his undoing. Within hours, Ukrainian intelligence had the route, the cargo, and, most importantly, the schedule. The target wasn't a tank or a base this time. It was a moving lifeline. A train long enough to stretch over the horizon, hauling the fuel that kept Russia's war machine alive. What followed was one of the most cunning ambushes of the entire war. Ukrainian special forces, operating deep behind enemy lines, began planting explosives along a stretch of railway that cut through a wooded valley in occupied Zaporizhia. They didn't just set a single charge. They turned the landscape itself into a trap. Anti-tank mines were buried beneath the rails, shaped charges were placed on the wooden sleepers, and motion sensors were hidden inside signal posts. The plan wasn't simply to derail the train. It was to flip it, destroy it, and make sure every drop of that precious diesel went up in flames. For weeks, they waited. Drones circled overhead, disguised as birds in the radar, watching for the telltale signs of an approaching convoy. Each night, small teams of saboteurs crawled through mud and brush to inspect their work, ensuring no Russian patrol had discovered the setup. The risk was enormous. One wrong move, one careless sound, and they would be captured, or worse. But to them, this wasn't just sabotage, it was survival. Every liter of Russian fuel destroyed meant fewer bombs, fewer tanks, and fewer attacks on Ukrainian cities. Finally, the day arrived. Just after midnight, the first vibration sensors along the track detected movement. The sound was faint at first, a rhythmic metallic hum, but soon it grew into a thunderous roar echoing through the trees. The train was massive, more than 40 cars long, guarded by soldiers in armored wagons at the front and rear. It carried exactly what Ukrainian intelligence had promised, tanker after tanker filled to the brim with diesel, destined for the front lines near Tokmak. From a concealed outpost, a Ukrainian spotter whispered into his radio, "Freight confirmed. Begin sequence." Then came the thunder. The first explosion ripped through the middle of the train, blowing rails skyward and instantly derailing the central tankers. The impact caused a chain reaction. Sparks met fuel, and fuel met air. The night turned into a firestorm. A blinding orange bloom lit the forest, followed by the deafening screech of metal grinding against earth. In seconds, the perfectly aligned carriages began to twist and flip like toys. Flames poured from the ruptured tankers, sending columns of black smoke rising miles into the sky. Russian soldiers, dazed and disoriented, tried to flee, but the ground beneath them was still mined. The secondary charges detonated one after another, targeting the front and rear of the train to trap survivors. It wasn't a single explosion. It was a symphony of destruction, timed and layered. Each blast flipped another carriage, spilling its deadly cargo into the fire. Within minutes, the entire train was engulfed. Witnesses miles away described it as a second sun. By dawn, the flames were still raging. The air reeked of burning diesel, and the heat was so intense that even birds avoided the area. Drone footage released later by Ukrainian intelligence showed a hell's cape. Charred metal twisted into impossible shapes, a river of black smoke streaming into the clouds. The tracks had been completely obliterated. Not a single section of the railway remained intact for nearly a kilometer. Russia's vaunted supply line, one of its few remaining lifelines into southern Ukraine, had been reduced to molten wreckage. The true brilliance of the operation wasn't just the explosions, it was the precision. Ukraine hadn't chosen that site randomly. It was a choke point, a section of track that crossed a narrow bridge with only one access road. That meant once the train was destroyed, recovery or repair efforts would be almost impossible. Russian emergency crews couldn't even approach for hours, because every path was booby-trapped with secondary mines. When they finally did, new drone strikes forced them to retreat. The sabotage team had turned the entire valley into a death trap, and Russia walked right into it. By the time the fires were under control, an estimated 1,000 tons of diesel had been lost. The spill spread for hundreds of meters, soaking into the soil and flowing into nearby streams. Flames danced across pools of burning fuel, and the smoke could be seen as far as Berdyansk. Analysts said the damage was equivalent to destroying an entire week's worth of frontline fuel consumption. Without it, dozens of tanks and armored vehicles ground to a halt. Russia's offensive momentum, already slowed by months of attrition, suddenly froze. Moscow's reaction was predictable. State media called it an accident caused by equipment failure. But satellite imagery released the next day told the real story. The crater beneath the tracks was perfectly symmetrical, a telltale signature of planted mines. Even pro-Russian bloggers couldn't deny the scale of the disaster. Someone knew exactly where to hit. One wrote before his post was swiftly deleted. In Kiev, the mood was electric. Officials didn't need to confirm anything. The images spoke for themselves. On encrypted channels, Ukrainian soldiers shared clips of the burning wreck with a single caption, "Boom." To them, it wasn't just another victory, it was a statement. Russia's lifelines could be severed anywhere, anytime, without warning. But behind the celebration lay months of preparation and risk. The saboteurs who had planted the mines didn't all make it back. Some were caught during withdrawal, others injured by their own explosives. For those who survived, the mission became legend. They had taken out an entire Russian fuel convoy without a single missile or drone, only with patience, intelligence, and courage. Western analysts quickly picked up on the strike's sophistication. It wasn't a random act of sabotage, it was coordinated warfare. Ukraine had learned to weaponize terrain itself, to fight not with overwhelming firepower, but with precision engineering. They've turned railways into battlegrounds, one British defense expert remarked. Every track Russia rebuilds becomes another target. The psychological damage was even greater. Russian train crews began refusing to travel certain routes. Engineers demanded hazard pay. Commanders ordered extra patrols and drones to monitor tracks, stretching resources even thinner. Some even accused their own workers of sabotage, arresting innocent railmen in paranoia. For Ukraine, that fear was part of the victory. When the enemy starts suspecting his own shadow, he's already losing. Weeks later, new satellite images showed that the destroyed section of railway still hadn't been repaired. The twisted remains of tankers sat rusting in place, black scars on the landscape. Locals said the ground was still warm weeks after the explosion. The fuel had seeped so deep into the earth that small fires would spontaneously reignite at night, as if the land itself refused to cool down. For Russia, the disaster triggered a logistical crisis. With that line cut, convoys had to reroute hundreds of kilometers north through exposed highways, where Ukrainian drones and partisans waited. Each reroute meant more risk, more fuel burned, more delays. For soldiers on the front lines, it meant dry tanks, empty generators, and rationed supplies. Some units resorted to siphoning fuel from civilian vehicles. The war that once seemed fueled by endless resources was now grinding on fumes.